The stars ahead looked like a curtain of ice, and behind that curtain waited a small yellow sun that the Vareth Dominion had marked for conquest a long time ago. Fleet Marshal Acasus Rel stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Devourer of Light, and watched the star grow brighter on the main screen with every passing hour. He had crossed 60 light-years to reach this place. He had crossed 4 other species along the way, and none of them had lasted more than a single season of war. He saw no reason why this one would be different. The Armada behind him stretched for thousands of kilometers. 300 warships moved together in a slow, patient formation, their hulls painted the deep violet of the Dominion Navy, their engines burning with a blue light that turned the empty space around them into something that almost looked beautiful. Troop carriers floated among the warships like fat insects guarded by wasps. Supply haulers trailed behind, carrying enough fuel and weapons to burn a planet clean if that became necessary. It usually did not become necessary. Most species surrendered once they understood what they were facing. Rel had studied the reports on this target world for years. The scouts who first found it called it Sol 3, though the natives called it Earth. The reports were strange. Early scans showed a species that built simple radio towers and flew crude rockets that barely escaped their own atmosphere. Later scans, taken only a decade later, showed something different. Their radio signals had changed shape, become sharper, more layered, as if they were hiding something inside the noise. Their fleet of orbital stations had grown from 3 to over 40. Their weapons had grown teeth. Most of Rel's officers had dismissed this. A species that jumped so quickly from crude rockets to real technology was rare, they said, but rare did not mean dangerous. The greatest empires in Dominion history had once been small and weak too, and they had needed centuries to become strong. No species could master new technology fast enough to threaten an armada like this one. Not in the short span of years the reports described. Rel agreed with them in public. In private, in the quiet of his own quarters, he kept an old data slate with every report on Earth that Dominion scouts had ever filed, and sometimes he read them again in the middle of the ship's long night cycle. His second officer, a sharp young commander named Ves Terrain, walked onto the deck and saluted with a closed fist against her chest. She had earned her rank the hard way, fighting through 3 campaigns before she turned 30, and Rel trusted her judgment more than he trusted most of the older officers who had bought their positions with political favors. "Marshal," she said, "we are 11 hours from the outer edge of their system. Long-range sensors show no active defense grid beyond their 4th planet. Their fleet, what we can see of it, is gathered close to their home world. It looks like they mean to make their stand there, and nowhere else." Rel nodded slowly. That is what a frightened species does. They gather everything close to the nest and hope the walls of the nest will save them. "Should we expect resistance before we reach orbit?" "We should expect nothing and prepare for everything," Rel said. It was an old Dominion saying, taught to every cadet before their first campaign, and he had repeated it so many times that it had stopped sounding like wisdom and started sounding like a habit. Still, he believed it. He had survived 4 campaigns because he never let his guard fall, not even against enemies who seemed weak on paper. The Armada moved on. Days passed inside the ship the way they always did, during a long crossing, marked by shift changes and meal cycles rather than sunrise and sunset. The crew of the Devourer of Light numbered close to 4,000, and most of them had never seen real combat. They had trained on simulators and listened to stories from veterans, but war was still an idea to them, something that happened to other people in other places. Rel watched them in the mess halls sometimes, listening to their nervous jokes, and he remembered being that young once, before his first battle taught him what fear actually felt like. 3 days before the fleet reached Earth's system, the sensor officers picked up something odd. A cluster of automated buoys sat scattered along the outer edge of the system, small unmanned devices that did nothing but broadcast a simple signal on a loop. Rel ordered his intelligence officers to decode the signal, expecting some kind of warning or threat. Instead, the message turned out to be nothing more than an old recording, a human voice speaking words that the ship's translator struggled to render clearly, something about peace and cooperation, and a request to speak before any violence began. "They are asking us to talk," Ves said, reading the translated transcript with a mixture of surprise and amusement. "They always ask, in the beginning," Rel answered. "It rarely changes anything. He gave the order to ignore the buoys and continue the approach. It was standard Dominion procedure. Every species asked to negotiate before the Armada arrived in force, and every species discovered, eventually, that negotiation, from a position of weakness, meant nothing at all. The Dominion did not conquer worlds because it hated the people who lived there. It conquered worlds because worlds were resources, and resources belonged to whoever was strong enough to take them. Rel did not enjoy killing for its own sake, but he had stopped feeling guilt about it a long time ago. War was simply how the universe worked, and he was very good at it. The fleet crossed into the outer system on the 4th day, passing the icy debris of Earth's outermost worlds without incident. Sensor readings continued to show a strange pattern, one that bothered Rel more than he wanted to admit. Human defense stations near the outer planets showed almost no activity. No patrol ships came out to challenge the Armada, no warning shots, no defensive minefields, nothing but silence and the slow drift of asteroids and ice. It felt less like an enemy preparing for battle, and more like an enemy who had already given up, or an enemy who was waiting for something else entirely. Vess raised the concern first, during a strategy meeting held in the flagship's war room, a wide circular chamber with a floating star map at its center. Senior officers from across the fleet had gathered by hologram to plan the final approach, their faces glowing faintly blue in the dim light of the projected stars. "Marshal, I do not like how quiet this is," she said. "A species with the technology to build 40 orbital stations in a decade should have some kind of picket line out here, even a weak one. This silence feels planned." An older officer, Fleet Captain Doran Kesh, waved a clawed hand dismissively. He commanded the second-largest warship in the Armada and had 30 years of service behind him, most of it spent putting down rebellions on already conquered worlds rather than fighting a real campaign. "They are simply too weak to project their forces this far from their home world," he said. "That is not a mystery, Commander Terrain. That is common sense. A young species spends everything it has defending the center and has nothing left for the edges." "Or," Vess said, "they know something about the edges that we do not." Rel listened to the argument without joining it right away. He had learned, over the years, that the moment between hearing two good arguments and choosing between them was often the most important moment of a campaign. He looked at the star map, at the glowing dot that marked Earth, small and blue and utterly unremarkable against the vast dark backdrop of the galaxy. Somewhere on that dot, 4 billion small, warm creatures were waiting for him, and he still did not know, not really, what kind of creatures they had become. "We proceed as planned," he finally said, "but we increase sensor sweeps along our flanks and to our rear. If Commander Terrain's instincts are correct, I would rather find the surprise before it finds us." The order was given, and the fleet's sensor grid expanded, casting a wider net of detection across the dark space around the Armada. For 2 more days, the net came back empty. The crew grew more confident with each passing hour, joking in the corridors about how easy this campaign would be, about how they might be home again within a single Dominion year, covered in honors and rich with the spoils of a new conquered world. Even Vess, cautious as she was, found herself relaxing slightly as the 4th planet of the system grew larger on the main view screen, its surface a familiar mix of brown continents and blue oceans. Then, on the 6th day, one of the junior sensor officers on the Devourer of Light noticed something strange in the data. It was a small thing, easy to miss, a slight gravitational fluctuation in the empty space, several million kilometers behind the fleet's current position, well outside the range where any enemy ship should have been able to hide. The officer flagged it as a possible sensor error and moved on to other readings, too nervous about his first real deployment to bother the bridge crew with something that was probably nothing. Rel did not learn about the reading that day. He was busy reviewing invasion plans with his ground force commanders, plans that called for a swift, overwhelming strike on the largest human cities once the fleet gained orbital superiority. He believed, as he had believed for years, that speed and overwhelming force were the surest way to end a war quickly, and with the fewest losses on both sides. He wanted this to be over fast. He wanted to add Earth to the long list of worlds that now paid tribute to the Dominion, and he wanted to do it without losing more of his young, untested crew than necessary. The fleet crossed the orbit of the system's 5th planet, a massive gas giant, ringed with dozens of moons, and Rel allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The hardest part of any campaign was the crossing itself, the long stretch of time spent traveling through empty space, with nothing to do but wait and worry. Now the waiting was almost over. Within a day, the Armada would reach Earth's outer defense perimeter, and the true campaign would finally begin. That night, ship time, the strange gravitational fluctuation was noticed again, this time by a more senior officer running a routine diagnostic on the fleet's rear sensor array. This reading was stronger than the first, unmistakable now, a slow bending of space that suggested something large was moving in the darkness behind the Armada, something large enough to leave a shadow, even through the layers of stealth technology it clearly carried. The officer did not hesitate. She sent the alert directly to the bridge, marked urgent, and within minutes Rel stood in front of the sensor display himself, staring at a faint smear of distorted space that had no business being there. "How long has this been building?" he asked, his voice flat and controlled even as something cold settled into his chest. "Unknown, Marshal. The pattern suggests slow, controlled movement, consistent with a very large vessel under heavy cloaking. It has likely been tracking us since we entered the system, possibly longer." Vess arrived on the bridge moments later, her expression grim but not surprised. "I told you," she said quietly, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. Rel looked at the star map again, at the small blue dot of Earth ahead of them, and the faint gravitational shadow now confirmed behind them. And for the first time since this campaign began, he felt the old cold instinct that had kept him alive through 4 previous wars. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. And it had been wrong for days, hiding in the dark behind his fleet the entire time they crossed this system, patient and silent, waiting for exactly the right moment to reveal itself. "Sound the fleet-wide alert," he said. "I want every gun crew at their stations within 10 minutes. I want full sensor sweeps to the rear, maximum power, and I want to know what is following us before it decides to stop following and start attacking." The alarms began to sound across the Devourer of Light. A low, rolling tone that spread through the ship's corridors and pulled crew members from their bunks and mess halls toward battle stations they had trained for but never truly expected to use. Across the Armada, other ships picked up the signal and mirrored it, 300 warships suddenly coming alive with the tense energy of a fleet that had just realized, all at once, that the hunt it believed itself to be conducting might have quietly become something else entirely. Rel stood at the center of it all, watching the rear sensor display as the fleet's most advanced scanning arrays strained against the darkness, trying to pierce whatever cloaking technology hid the shape that now clearly moved behind them, matching their speed, matching their course, close enough now that its gravitational signature had grown from a faint smear into something almost solid. Whatever it was massive. Whatever it was, it had followed his entire Armada across the final approach to Earth, without a single one of his sensor operators noticing, until it was already this close. "Marshal," Vess said quietly, standing at his shoulder. "If that is a warship, and if it is as large as the readings suggest, then it did not arrive here by accident. It was placed here. Someone knew our approach vector before we did." Rel did not answer right away. He kept his eyes on the display, on the slow, patient shadow closing the distance behind his fleet, and for the first time in this entire campaign, he found himself wondering whether the quiet, unremarkable species on the small blue world ahead of him had been planning something far more dangerous than surrender from the very beginning. He called for Fleet Captain Kesh over the comm, and the old officer's face appeared on a side screen, his earlier confidence already fading into something more careful. "Marshal, I have seen the readings. My gunners are at their stations. What are your orders?" "Hold formation," Rel said. "Do not turn the main fleet around. If we break formation now, and it turns out to be nothing more than a debris field or a strange asteroid, we will have shown every ship in this Armada that their marshal panics at shadows. Send 2 scout ships back along our rear vector. I want eyes on that shape before we commit to anything larger. And if the scouts do not come back, then we will know it is not a debris field," Rel said. The 2 scout ships broke away from the main formation within minutes, small fast vessels built for speed and stealth rather than firepower, their pilots among the most skilled in the fleet. Rel watched their icons on the tactical display as they curved away from the Armada and began the long run back toward the gravitational anomaly, cutting their engines low to avoid drawing attention, relying on passive sensors alone. It was standard procedure, the kind of careful, measured response that had kept Rel alive through campaigns that had killed less careful commanders. He told himself this was nothing more than caution, that the shape behind them was probably some kind of automated station, or perhaps a support vessel that had simply drifted into their wake by accident. He did not entirely believe it, but he told himself anyway, because a fleet marshal who let his crew see real fear before a battle had already lost half the fight. Vess remained on the bridge, watching the same display, her jaw tight. She had grown up on a border world that the Dominion annexed when she was a child, and she remembered, distantly, what it felt like to be the smaller side in an unequal fight. She had joined the Dominion Navy afterward, rising through its ranks with a mixture of skill and quiet anger that she rarely spoke about, and she had learned over the years that the side which controlled information usually controlled the battle before a single shot was fired. Right now she felt, for the first time in this campaign, that the humans might understand this better than the Dominion did. "Marshal," she said, "if I may speak freely." "You always do, Commander. Go ahead." "The signal our scouts intercepted before we entered this system, the one asking for negotiation. I think we dismissed it too quickly." "You think they were serious about talking?" "I think," Vess said slowly, "that a species capable of hiding a ship this large behind our entire formation, without a single sensor pickup until we were already deep inside their system, is not a species that begs. I think that message may have been the only warning they intended to give us." Rel said nothing to that. He had commanded 4 campaigns, and in every one of them, the enemy had eventually begged, cried, or simply broken, because in the end, the Dominion's numbers and technology always won. He did not want to consider the possibility that this pattern, so reliable for so long, might not hold here. But he was also not a fool, and he had not survived this long by ignoring uncomfortable evidence simply because it was uncomfortable. The scout ships reached the edge of detection range within the hour, their sensor feeds streaming back to the flagship in a steady flow of data. At first, the readings showed nothing but empty space, the same stretch of dark, cold nothing that filled most of any solar system. Then, gradually, the passive sensors on both scouts began to pick up faint distortions, curves in the readings, that suggested a very large mass, bending the space around it, despite showing almost no visible signature at all. Whatever hit out there, it was built to avoid detection even at close range, which meant it had been built by people who understood Dominion sensor technology well enough to defeat it. "Marshal, this is Scout 2, came a tense voice over the comm, the pilot's breathing audible even through the static of deep space transmission. "I have a partial visual. I say again, partial visual only. The object is—"
"Marshal, it is enormous. I am reading a hull length that does not make sense against our current sensor calibration. Requesting immediate confirmation from Scout 1 before I report a number I do not believe myself."
A long pause followed, filled only by the low hum of the bridge and the quiet murmur of officers at their stations, trying not to look as nervous as they felt. Then Scout 1's pilot came through, his voice tighter than the first. "Confirmed, Marshal. Hull length approximately 4 kilometers. Structure consistent with heavy capital ship design. No active weapons signature detected, but the hull appears— I do not have a better word for this, sir. It appears armored beyond anything in our current threat database. I am transmitting full sensor logs now. 4 kilometers. Rel did the calculation in his head without needing to look at a screen. The Devourer of Light. The pride of the Dominion fleet and the largest warship he had ever commanded, measured just under 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Whatever waited in the dark behind his armada was more than twice that size, larger than anything the Dominion had ever built, larger than anything Rel had ever heard of any species building, human or otherwise. And it had been sitting there, silent and patient, somewhere along his fleet's approach vector, since before his armada had even crossed into the outer system. "Bring the scouts home," Rel said, his voice steady even though his mind was racing through every tactical possibility he could think of. "Do not approach further. I want that data analyzed by every officer we have, the moment it arrives." The bridge fell into a tense quiet as the order was carried out, broken only by the soft beeping of instruments and the low murmur of crew members, relaying information between stations. Rel stood at the center of it, staring at the tactical display, at the small icon that now marked the location of the massive vessel behind his fleet, and at the growing distance between that icon and the icon marking his own flagship as the Armada continued its slow, steady approach toward Earth. He thought about turning the fleet around immediately, about abandoning the approach to Earth and dealing with this threat head-on before it had a chance to act. But turning 300 ships around in open space took time during which his fleet would be vulnerable from two directions at once, caught between the unknown vessel behind them and whatever defenses the humans had prepared closer to their home world. He thought about pressing forward instead, ignoring the threat behind them, and trusting in the speed of his approach to reach Earth and secure a defensible position before the mystery ship could close the distance. Both options carried enormous risk, and Rel had learned long ago that the worst decisions in war were the ones made in a hurry, out of fear rather than clear thinking. "Get me a full tactical projection," he said finally. "I want to know how much time we have before that vessel, if it chooses to act, can bring its weapons to bear on our formation. I want options, not opinions, and I want them within the hour." The bridge crew moved into motion, officers bending over their consoles, running calculations, cross-referencing sensor data with the fleet's threat assessment systems. Vess remained close to Rel, watching him with an expression that mixed professional discipline with something that looked almost like sympathy. She had seen commanders freeze in moments like this before, overwhelmed by a threat they had not prepared for, and she was quietly relieved to see that Rel was not one of them. He was afraid, she could tell that much, but his fear had not stopped him from thinking. "Whatever this is," Rel said quietly, mostly to himself, "it did not appear here by chance. Someone placed it exactly where they knew we would pass. That means they knew our course before we set it. That means they have been watching us far longer than we realized, and far more closely." Vess nodded slowly. "Which means the quiet species on that blue world ahead of us may not be quiet at all. It may simply be patient. Outside the viewports of the Devourer of Light." The stars continued their slow, silent drift, indifferent to the tension building on the bridge below. Earth grew larger on the main screen with every passing hour, blue and green and utterly still, giving no outward sign of the storm that was building around it on both sides. Somewhere far behind the Armada, in the cold dark of open space, the massive shape continued its slow, deliberate pursuit, closing the distance one careful kilometer at a time, patient in a way that felt, to every officer who studied its sensor readings, less like an accident of nature, and more like the opening move of a plan that had been years in the making. 6 years before the Verith Dominion Armada crossed into the outer edge of the Sol system, a damaged alien scout ship fell out of hyperspace above the orbit of Jupiter and drifted, silent and broken, toward the sun. Human deep space sensors picked it up within hours, a small, sleek craft leaking radiation from a cracked engine core, tumbling slowly end over end with no sign of active systems. A recovery team from the newly formed United Earth Defense Fleet reached it 3 days later, and what they found inside changed the course of human history. The pilot was dead, killed by the same engine failure that had crippled the ship, but the ship's data core survived intact. Buried inside that core, alongside star charts and technical schematics that human engineers would spend years trying to fully understand, was something far more valuable than any single piece of technology. It was a record, a long and detailed record, of the Verith Dominion's pattern of conquest. Dozens of worlds, their locations, their species, the timeline of first contact through to final surrender, all of it laid out in careful, bureaucratic detail, because the Dominion kept records the way any large, confident empire kept records, never imagining that one of their own scout ships would fall into the hands of a species they had not yet decided to conquer. Dr. Amara Chen led the analysis team that first cracked the encryption on that data core, and she still remembered the night, 3 months into the project, when the true scale of what they had found became clear. They scouted first, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades, watching a species grow, measuring its technology, waiting until the target world reached a level of development worth the cost of conquest, and then they struck all at once with overwhelming force. The pattern was always the same. The pattern, once you understood it, was predictable. Chen brought her findings to General Marcus Reyes, the newly appointed commander of Earth's combined defense forces, in a small briefing room, deep beneath the mountains of Colorado. Reyes was a career soldier who had spent most of his working life planning for wars that never happened, and he listened to Chen's presentation with the careful, patient attention of a man who had learned not to dismiss anything simply because it sounded impossible. "They will come," Chen told him, laying out star charts and timeline projections across the room's central table. "Based on the growth curve of our own technology and the pattern documented in this data, I estimate we have somewhere between 5 and 8 years before a Dominion scout fleet notices us seriously enough to schedule a full invasion." 5 to 8 years, Reyes repeated slowly, to prepare for war against a fleet that has apparently never lost. "Never lost against a species that did not know they were coming," Chen said. "That is the difference." Every world in this record was surprised, every single one. They saw the scouts, sometimes, and dismissed them as meteors or sensor glitches. They never had years of advance warning. We do. Reyes studied the data for a long time before he spoke again. He thought about the political mess that would follow if he brought this to the world's governments too early. The panic, the disbelief, the arguments over resources and command structure that could waste years they did not have. He thought about the opposite risk too, the danger of moving too slowly, of treating this discovery as a curiosity, rather than the most urgent problem humanity had ever faced. In the end, he made the decision that would shape the next 6 years of his life, and the lives of everyone who worked under him. "We do this quietly," he said. "We do not announce an alien invasion to 8 billion people who have no way to prepare for it individually. We build what we need to build. We tell only the people who need to know, and we do it in a way that gives us every possible advantage when the day finally comes." The project that followed did not have an official name in any public record. Within the small circle of people who knew about it, it was simply called the Long Watch, and it consumed a larger share of Earth's combined military budget than any project in human history, hidden inside a tangle of classified funding lines and cover programs that made it look, on paper, like a dozen unrelated research initiatives. Chen's analysis team grew from a handful of scientists into a division of thousands, poring over every scrap of Dominion technology recovered from that single downed scout ship, reverse engineering what they could, theorizing about what they could not yet build, and slowly, carefully, mapping out exactly how a Dominion invasion fleet was likely to approach the Sol system when the time finally came. The most important discovery came almost 2 years into the project, buried in the scout ship's navigational logs. Dominion invasion fleets, it turned out, did not simply fly toward a target system in a straight line. They followed carefully calculated approach vectors, chosen to minimize fuel consumption and travel time across the vast distances between stars, vectors that depended on the precise positions of gravitational bodies along the route. Given the fixed positions of nearby stars and the Dominion's own recorded navigational habits, Chen's team could calculate, with startling accuracy, the exact corridor of space an invasion fleet would most likely travel through as it made its final approach to Earth. "If we know where they are going to be," Chen told Reyes during one of their regular briefings, "then we do not need to build a fleet that can beat them in an even fight. We need to build one ship, one very large, very well-hidden ship, and we need to put it exactly where they will least expect it. Not in front of them, where they will see it coming and prepare. Behind them, where their own sensors are weakest and their own formation makes it hardest to turn and fight." Reyes had asked, at the time, whether a single ship could really make that much difference against an armada of hundreds. Chen had smiled, the tired, determined smile of a scientist who had spent 2 years thinking about nothing else, and told him that the ship would not need to defeat the entire armada alone. It would need to do one thing, and one thing only, better than anything the Dominion had ever encountered. It would need to close the trap. The construction of that ship, which the engineering teams eventually named the Nightfall, took place in absolute secrecy inside a hollowed-out asteroid deep in the outer edge of the solar system's asteroid belt, far from any commercial shipping lane, its location known to fewer than 200 people across the entire planet. Building materials were shipped and disguised as mining equipment. Engineers and construction crews were rotated in and out, under cover stories about deep space research stations. The project consumed steel and rare metals at a rate that occasionally forced Chen's team to quietly manipulate global commodity markets, just to avoid drawing attention to the sudden demand. The Nightfall. grew slowly across those years, plate by plate, system by system, inside its hollow asteroid shell. It was built around principles that mixed captured Dominion technology with pure human ingenuity, armored in a composite hull thicker than anything the Dominion's own warships carried, because the ship's engineers had decided from the very beginning that its greatest weapon would not be speed or firepower, but the simple fact that the enemy would not know it was coming until it was already far too late to matter. Its cloaking systems, built from a combination of reverse-engineered Dominion stealth technology and entirely new human research into gravitational distortion, were designed for one purpose above all others: to let a ship 4 kilometers long sit silently in open space, invisible to any sensor sweep short of a direct, close-range scan. Captain Elena Vasquez took command of the Nightfall. 2 years before the Dominion fleet finally arrived, chosen from a short list of the most experienced officers in the newly built Earth Defense Fleet, she had spent 15 years flying combat aircraft and orbital patrol ships before the Long Watch program recruited her, and she brought to the Nightfall a mixture of discipline and calm that her crew came to rely on more than any piece of the ship's advanced technology. She did not believe in speeches about glory or destiny. She believed in preparation, and she drilled her crew of nearly 3,000 men and women relentlessly, running simulation after simulation of the moment when the Dominion fleet would finally cross into the Sol system. "We are not here to win a fair fight," she told her crew during one of the countless briefings held in the ship's main hall as construction neared completion. "We are here because there is no such thing as a fair fight against an enemy who has already conquered 50 other worlds. Our advantage is not our weapons. Our advantage is that they do not know we exist. The moment that changes, our advantage changes with it. So we train, and we wait, and we make sure that when the day comes, we are the only ones who are ready." The years passed. Earth's ordinary population lived their lives with no idea that a war was already being planned somewhere far above their heads, though a careful observer might have noticed the strange pattern of new orbital stations appearing over the following years, dismissed by most as ambitious commercial ventures, or the beginnings of a new age of space tourism. In truth, every one of those stations fed into the Long Watch network, a growing web of sensors stretching across the outer solar system, watching, listening, waiting for the first sign of a Dominion scout ship approaching, for a final confirmation before the real invasion fleet was dispatched. That sign came almost exactly on schedule, 5 years and 8 months after Chen's original briefing to General Reyes. A small, fast Dominion scout, cloaked and careful, slipped into the outer edge of the system and spent 11 days quietly gathering data before vanishing back into deep space. The Long Watch sensor network caught it anyway, tracking its exact approach and departure vectors with a level of detail the Dominion scout pilot never suspected, because Chen's team had spent years building sensors specifically designed to catch exactly this kind of quiet, cautious probe. "They have their confirmation," Reyes said grimly, standing with Chen and Captain Vasquez in the underground command center. As the scout's departure was logged and analyzed, the invasion fleet will not be far behind. 18 months, based on the pattern from the other conquered worlds, Chen said. Possibly less. They do not linger once they have decided a world is worth taking. Vasquez had already begun running the final preparations before the meeting ended. The Nightfall was moved, over the following months, from its hidden construction site to a calculated position along the exact approach corridor Chen's team had projected years earlier, a position chosen with such precision that the ship's own navigational computer needed almost no correction once it settled into place, cloaked and silent, waiting in the dark for an armada that did not yet know it existed. It waited for 14 months before the first sign of the Dominion fleet appeared on the outer edge of long-range sensors, a slow, massive formation of ships crossing into the system exactly along the corridor Chen's team had predicted, exactly at the speed her calculations had estimated, close enough to the projected timeline that Vasquez allowed herself a rare, small smile when the first confirmed reading came through. "They are here," she told her crew over the ship's internal comm system, her voice steady despite the years of tension that had led to this single moment. "Everything we have trained for, everything this ship was built for, begins now. Battle stations, full silent running. We let them pass us. We let them believe they are alone in this system, and we do not move until the moment is exactly right. The Nightfall held its position as the Dominion Armada crossed into the outer system, drifting slowly and deliberately into the exact spot along the fleet's rear flank that Chen's calculations had marked years in advance, close enough now to read individual ship signatures within the enemy formation, far enough still to remain completely undetected by even their most sensitive sensor sweeps. Vasquez watched the enemy fleet grow on her tactical display, 300 warships moving in slow, confident formation toward a world that had spent 6 years quietly preparing for exactly this moment. And she felt, for the first time in a very long career, the strange calm that came from knowing that everything she had trained for was finally about to matter. "Let them get close," she said quietly to her bridge crew, watching the tactical display as the Dominion flagship's icon drifted deeper into the system, unaware that it had already been shadowed for days by something far larger than anything in its own formation. Let them believe, right up until the very last moment, that Earth is exactly as weak and unprepared as their old scans suggested. That belief is the only weapon we need. Below decks, the crew of the Nightfall moved through the ship with the quiet discipline of people who had rehearsed this exact moment hundreds of times before. Lieutenant Commander James Okoro, the ship's chief tactical officer, stood at his station in the Combat Information Center, watching a wall of screens display every ship in the Dominion formation, updated in real time by the ship's passive sensor array. He had joined the Long Watch program straight out of the Naval Academy, drawn by rumors of a secret project that his recruiting officer refused to describe in any detail, beyond promising that it would matter more than anything else he could do with his career. 6 years later, standing in front of a live enemy fleet for the first time, he finally understood what that recruiter had meant. 312 confirmed hulls, he reported to Vasquez, his voice carefully even, despite the tightness in his chest. 218 classified as warships, the remainder troop carriers and support vessels. Flagship confirmed at the center of the formation. Designation unknown. Hull length approximately 1.9 kilometers. And our position relative to their sensor coverage? Still clean, Captain. Their sensor sweeps are focused forward and to the flanks, consistent with the patterns we studied from the captured data core. Standard Dominion doctrine assumes threats come from ahead, not behind. They are not looking for us, because their own history has never taught them to look. Vasquez nodded slowly, filing that information away with quiet satisfaction. It was exactly what Chen's analysis had predicted years earlier, back when this entire plan had existed only as lines of projected data on a briefing room table. The Dominion had conquered 50 worlds by trusting a single doctrine over and over again, and that doctrine had never once needed to account for an enemy who was already waiting behind them before the invasion even began. Vasquez intended to make sure that mistake cost them everything. She thought, briefly, of the 6 years that had led to this moment. She thought of the long nights spent drilling her crew through simulation after simulation, of the arguments with engineers over cloaking tolerances measured in fractions of a percent, of the quiet, unglamorous work of thousands of people across Earth who had given up ordinary careers and ordinary lives to build a ship that most of humanity did not even know existed. None of them would get public credit for this, not for years, perhaps not ever, because the entire program depended on secrecy even now. Even as the moment of truth finally arrived, Vasquez had made peace with that trade a long time ago. She had not joined the Long Watch for recognition. She had joined it because someone needed to be ready, and she intended to be exactly that. Dr. Chen remained at Earth's underground command center throughout the fleet's approach, watching the same tactical feed that Vasquez studied aboard the Nightfall. Separated from the actual battlefield by millions of kilometers, but connected by a secure communication relay built specifically for this purpose. General Reyes stood beside her, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the slowly shifting positions of 300 alien warships, closing in on the world he had sworn to defend. "They still do not know," Reyes said quietly, more to himself than to Chen. "Not yet," Chen agreed. "Our sensor logs show their fleet running standard forward and flank sweeps only. Vasquez's team has done exactly what we hoped. They are close enough now to strike at any moment, and the Dominion fleet has no idea they exist. How long before they figure it out?" Chen considered the question carefully before answering. She had spent 6 years studying every piece of data recovered from that single downed scout ship, learning the patterns of an empire that had never once faced a threat it did not see coming. Based on their historical response times, once they detect an anomaly, it typically takes them several hours to confirm a real threat, rather than a sensor error. Their command structure is rigid. Officers do not act on incomplete information without authorization from a superior, and their superiors do not authorize action without multiple confirmations. That rigidity has served them well against species who never had the chance to exploit it. It will not serve them well here. Reyes allowed himself a small, tired smile, the first genuine smile Chen had seen from him in weeks. 6 years of your life, Doctor. 6 years of budgets I had to hide from half my own government. 6 years of secrecy that could have destroyed both our careers if any of it leaked before we were ready. Was it worth it? Ask me again in 24 hours, Chen said. Right now, I only know that we gave ourselves a chance. Whether that chance is enough depends on people like Captain Vasquez and her crew, not on anything either of us can control from down here. Aboard the Nightfall. The final hours before contact passed in a strange, heavy quiet. Crew members who were not on active duty gathered in small groups throughout the ship, some praying, some simply sitting together in silence, all of them aware that within a day, perhaps within hours, the largest and most important battle in human history would begin, and that the outcome would depend heavily on the ship they stood inside. Vasquez walked the length of the ship during one of the final rotations, stopping to speak briefly with crew members at their stations, not with grand speeches but with the simple, steady presence of a commander who wanted her people to know she trusted them. She found Okoro still at his station in the combat center, running one final check on the ship's weapon systems, a battery of experimental plasma cannons built from technology recovered from the original crashed scout ship, combined with human engineering that had pushed the design far beyond anything the Dominion itself had developed. The Nightfall was not simply a large ship. It was, in many ways, more advanced than anything in the Dominion Armada, built specifically to counter every weakness the captured data core had revealed about Dominion warship design. "Ready, Commander?" Vasquez asked. "As ready as 6 years of training can make anyone, Captain," Okoro said. "Though I admit, watching their formation on the screen makes it feel very real, in a way the simulations never quite managed." "It should," Vasquez said. "This is real. But remember what we trained for. We are not trying to destroy their entire fleet in one strike. We are trying to close a door behind them, cut their retreat, and force them into a fight on our terms instead of theirs. Earth's own defense fleet will meet them from the front. We are the wall behind them that they do not know is there, far ahead of the Nightfall." Unseen and unaware, the Dominion Armada continued its slow, confident approach toward Earth, its officers and crew still believing, as they had believed since the beginning of this campaign, that they faced nothing more than a young, technologically outmatched species, with no meaningful defense to speak of. Somewhere among those hundreds of ships, Fleet Marshal Rel had already begun to sense that something was wrong, that a shape had appeared in the darkness behind his formation, that should not have been there. He did not yet know what it truly was, or how long it had been watching, or how many years of quiet human preparation had gone into placing it exactly where it now waited. He only knew that his instincts, sharpened by 4 previous campaigns, were telling him that this invasion was not going to unfold the way every invasion before it had unfolded. And for the first time in a very long career, Fleet Marshal Acasis Rel found himself uncertain about what the coming hours would bring. Fleet Marshal Rel did not sleep that night, if the term still meant anything aboard a ship where the lights never truly dimmed, and the crew worked in endless rotating shifts. He stood on the bridge of the Devourer of Light for nearly 10 straight hours, watching the tactical projection his officers had built, a slow, careful model of the unknown vessel's position, speed, and possible intentions. The numbers did not comfort him. Whatever waited behind his fleet was massive, patient, and completely silent, and silence from an enemy that size felt far more dangerous than any open threat could have. Vess Terrain stood beside him through most of it, running calculations of her own, cross-checking them against the data streaming in from the 2 scout ships now safely returned to the main formation. "Marshal, if this vessel wanted to attack us directly, it has had ample opportunity already. It could have struck while we were spread thin crossing the outer system. It has not. That tells me something." That it is waiting for a better moment, Rel said. Or that it is not alone, Vess said quietly. A ship this size, built with this level of stealth technology, does not usually operate without support. If the humans built one weapon capable of hiding from Dominion sensors this effectively, it is reasonable to assume they built more than one system designed to work alongside it. We may be looking at the visible edge of something much larger. Rel considered this in silence. He had fought the kind of enemy who fought bravely and lost anyway. Species who threw everything they had into a doomed defense because pride mattered more to them than survival. He had never fought an enemy who built a trap, this patient, this careful, and this well hidden. The idea unsettled him more than he wanted to admit, because it suggested a level of discipline and long-term planning that the Dominion's own scouting reports had never once credited to this species. He called a full command conference, gathering every senior officer in the fleet by hologram into the war room once more. The mood in the chamber had changed completely, from the confident briefing held only days earlier. Even Fleet Captain Kesh, who had dismissed Vess's earlier warning so easily, now studied the tactical display with a tight, unhappy expression. Options, Rel said simply, looking around the circle of glowing holographic faces. I want to hear all of them, and I want them fast. Turn the fleet and engage the unknown vessel directly, suggested one of the younger captains, a hard-edged officer named Dross, who commanded one of the Armada's heavy cruiser squadrons. We outnumber whatever this is, by hundreds of ships. Even if it is larger than anything we have ever built, numbers will overwhelm it eventually. And leave our approach to Earth exposed while we do it, Kesh countered. If the humans have prepared a defense fleet near their homeworld, as our scans suggest, turning our entire formation around to deal with a single ship gives them time to strike us from the front while we are distracted behind us. Then we split the fleet, Dross said. Send a detachment back to deal with the unknown vessel, while the main force continues toward Earth. Rel weighed the suggestion carefully. Splitting the fleet carried its own risks, but it was, on the surface, the most balanced option available. He looked to Vess, whose judgment he had come to trust more than almost anyone else in the fleet, and waited for her assessment. A detachment could work, Vess said slowly, but only if we know what we are sending it against. Right now, we know the vessel's approximate size, and nothing else. We do not know its weapon capability, its speed, or whether it truly is alone. Sending a detachment in blind risks losing ships for nothing, and if the vessel proves stronger than expected, it could destroy that detachment before the rest of the fleet is close enough to help. Then what do you propose, Commander? Rel asked. A probe first, a small, fast strike group, enough firepower to test the vessel's defenses, and enough speed to withdraw quickly if the engagement turns against us. We learn what we are dealing with before we commit anything larger. Rel nodded slowly. It was the same cautious instinct that had guided most of his decisions since this campaign began, and it had served him well so far. Agreed. Captain Dross, your squadron will lead the probe. 6 cruisers, moving at maximum speed, weapons hot. I want you close enough to draw a reaction from that vessel, and I want you clear before it can bring its full weight to bear against you. Dross accepted the assignment with the eager confidence of a young officer who had spent his entire career waiting for a real battle to prove himself in, and within the hour, his 6 cruisers broke away from the main formation and turned back along the fleet's rear vector, engines burning bright as they accelerated toward the unknown vessel's last confirmed position. Aboard the Nightfall. Captain Vasquez watched the 6 approaching Dominion cruisers on her own tactical display, with the calm, measured attention of someone who had planned for exactly this moment. They are testing us, she said to Okoro, standing beside her at the command station, sending a small group ahead to see how we react before committing their main fleet. It is a sound tactic. I would have done the same in their position. Orders, Captain? We let them get close enough to believe they have found something worth reporting, and then we remind them why they should have been more afraid of the dark. The 6 Dominion cruisers closed the distance quickly, their sensors sweeping the space ahead of them with increasing intensity as they approached the coordinates their scouts had identified days earlier. For several tense minutes, they found nothing. The Nightfall. Cloaking field holding steady even under close-range scanning, until Vasquez finally gave the order to drop the cloak entirely, choosing the moment of revelation on her own terms rather than waiting for the enemy to stumble onto it by accident. The Nightfall appeared on Dominion sensors all at once, a massive shape blooming into existence, where a moment before there had been nothing but empty space, and the reaction aboard the 6 approaching cruisers was immediate and chaotic. Dross's own ship transmitted an urgent alert back to the main fleet, even as his squadron began evasive maneuvers, torn between the instinct to retreat and the standing orders that required him to gather as much information as possible before withdrawing. "Confirmed contact," Dross reported, his voice tight with a mixture of alarm and professional discipline. "Marshal, the vessel has decloaked. Hull length confirmed at approximately 4 kilometers. It has not yet opened fire. Requesting instructions. Aboard the Devourer of Light." Rel watched the scene unfold on his own tactical display, his hands gripping the edge of the command console as the massive shape of the human warship finally resolved into a clear image for the first time. It was unlike anything in the Dominion's threat database, its hull built from a dark, matte material that seemed to absorb the light around it rather than reflect it, its structure bristling with weapon emplacements that his own sensor officers were struggling to properly classify. "Marshal, weapon signatures do not match anything in our records," reported the fleet's chief intelligence officer, a nervous edge creeping into his usually composed voice. "Power readings from those emplacements are significant. I would estimate output comparable to, or possibly exceeding, our own flagship's primary batteries." Rel felt the cold certainty settle over him that Vess had been right from the very beginning. This was not an accident. This was not a debris field or a support vessel that had drifted into their path. This was a weapon, built specifically, deliberately, to be exactly where it now sat, and it had been waiting there since before his fleet had even entered the system. "Order Dross to withdraw immediately," Rel said. "Full retreat back to the main formation. I do not want to lose that squadron for information we already have enough of." The order came too late. Aboard the Nightfall, Vasquez watched the 6 Dominion cruisers begin their retreat and made her own decision, with the same calm precision that had defined every choice she had made across 6 years of preparation. "They know what we are now. There is no advantage left in letting them return safely to report it in detail. Commander Okoro, target the lead cruiser. Fire at will." The Nightfall. Plasma cannons fired for the first time in human history against a real enemy, and the effect was immediate and devastating. A beam of concentrated energy lanced across the darkness and struck Dross's lead cruiser directly amidships, punching through armor that had survived 3 previous Dominion campaigns without ever facing a weapon this powerful. The cruiser broke apart in a silent flash of light, debris scattering outward in a slow, expanding cloud, and within seconds, 2 more of the retreating cruisers suffered the same fate, caught by follow-up shots from the Nightfall. Wes secondary batteries before they could build enough distance to escape. Dross's own ship survived, barely, diving hard into an evasive spiral that carried it just outside the Nightfall. Z's effective firing arc, its hull scorched, and one engine trailing smoke as it limped back toward the safety of the main formation. Of the 6 cruisers sent out to probe the unknown vessel, only 3 returned, and the survivors carried with them sensor data that confirmed every fear Rel had allowed himself to consider since the anomaly first appeared on his rear sensors. The mood aboard the Devourer of Light shifted sharply in the aftermath of the skirmish. The confident, almost casual atmosphere that had defined the fleet's approach through the outer system was gone entirely, replaced by a tense, focused energy that Rel recognized from his earlier campaigns. The atmosphere of a crew that had just discovered their enemy was more dangerous than expected. He gathered his command staff once more, and this time, no one in the chamber suggested that this campaign would be easy. 3 ships lost in under 2 minutes, Kesh said grimly, reviewing the sensor logs from the engagement. A single vessel, and it destroyed half of Captain Dross's squadron before they could even properly return fire. "It is fast," Vess added, studying the same data. "Faster than anything we have encountered from a species at this technological level. Its weapons fired with almost no charge delay, which suggests either an extremely advanced power system or a fundamentally different approach to energy weapon design than anything in our own fleet." Rel stared at the tactical display, At the icon marking the human warship, now clearly visible and no longer hidden, sitting patiently behind his formation, exactly where it had waited for days. He thought about turning the entire fleet to face it directly, throwing overwhelming numbers against a single vessel, until sheer weight of fire broke through its defenses. He thought about the risk of doing so, while an unknown defense fleet near Earth remained unaccounted for, close enough to strike his exposed flank the moment he committed his forces elsewhere. "It wants us divided," he said finally, thinking aloud as much as briefing his officers. "It let those 3 ships return specifically, so that we would see exactly how dangerous it is. That is not the behavior of a weapon meant to hide forever. That is the behavior of a weapon meant to create fear, to force a difficult choice on us, at exactly the moment we can least afford to make a mistake." "Then what do we do, Marshal?" Kesh asked. Rel was quiet for a long moment, watching the tactical display shift and update, as sensor readings continued streaming in from across the fleet. Behind them, the massive human warship remained in position, no longer hidden, no longer subtle, simply waiting, patient and confident, as if it already knew exactly what choice the Dominion fleet would be forced to make. Ahead of them, Earth continued its slow, silent orbit, still unreadable, still hiding whatever additional defenses it had spent years quietly preparing. "We do exactly what that ship does not expect," Rel said at last. "We do not split our forces further, and we do not turn away from Earth. We accelerate our approach and force this fight to happen on our terms, close to the planet, where our numbers and our ground assault capability still matter. If they want to fight us behind our own formation, they will have to catch us first." It was a decision born from 4 campaigns worth of hard-earned instinct, the choice of a commander who understood that hesitation, in the face of an unknown threat, often caused more damage than boldness ever could. Whether it was the right choice, Rel could not yet know. He only knew that somewhere ahead of him, on a small blue world that had spent far longer preparing for this war than anyone in the Dominion had ever imagined, the true scale of what humanity had built was still waiting to be revealed. The order to accelerate rippled through the Armada within minutes, and 300 ships adjusted their formation, tightening their spacing, and increasing engine output as the fleet pressed harder toward Earth. Rel watched the fuel consumption reports scroll across a side display, and felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Faster travel meant less margin for error later, less fuel reserved for extended combat maneuvers, less flexibility, if the battle near Earth turned into something longer, and more grinding than he hoped. But a slow, cautious approach now, with an enemy warship openly shadowing his rear flank, felt like an even greater risk. He had made his choice, and there was no comfortable way to walk it back. Aboard the Nightfall. Vasquez watched the Dominion fleet's sudden shift in behavior, with a mixture of professional interest and quiet satisfaction. "They are running," she said, studying the acceleration curves on her tactical display. "Not away from us, toward Earth. Smart. They know a wounded animal that keeps moving is harder to finish off than one that stands still and fights." "Do we pursue, Captain?" Okoro asked. "Not yet. Let them believe distance is protecting them a little longer. Our job right now is not to destroy this fleet by ourselves. Our job is to make sure that when they reach Earth, they arrive exhausted, disorganized, and already looking over their shoulder. Every kilometer they run from us is a kilometer they spend afraid instead of focused. That fear is worth more right now than another skirmish." She opened a secure channel to Earth's command center, the connection humming faintly with the delay of distance, even at faster-than-light relay speeds. General Reyes and Dr. Chen appeared on her display within moments, both of them clearly having waited anxiously for this exact update. "Report, Captain," Reyes said. "Contact made and confirmed, General. We engaged a probing detachment of 6 cruisers, destroyed 3, damaged a 4th. The Dominion fleet knows we exist now, and knows roughly what we can do. They have accelerated their approach toward Earth, rather than turning to engage us directly." Chen leaned forward slightly, her expression sharp with focus. That matches the pattern from the data core. When a Dominion commander faces an unexpected threat he cannot immediately understand, standard doctrine favors securing the primary objective quickly, rather than resolving secondary threats first. They will want to establish control near Earth before dealing with us properly. "Which means they will arrive faster than our original timeline predicted," Reyes said, a note of concern entering his voice. "Is the home fleet ready?" The home fleet has been ready for 18 months, General, Vasquez said. The only question now is timing, and I intend to make sure our timing works in our favor rather than theirs. After the channel closed, Vasquez remained at her station for a long while, watching the Dominion formation continue its acceleration on the tactical display, 300 ships pulling away from her position at a steadily increasing rate. She thought about the 6 years that had led to this moment, about every simulation, every argument over ship design, every long night spent worrying whether any of this would actually work when the time finally came. The skirmish with Dross's squadron had answered one important question. The nightfall. His weapons worked exactly as designed, and the Dominion fleet, for all its confidence and its long history of easy conquest, had no answer for them. But one successful skirmish did not win a war, and Vasquez knew it. The Dominion still outnumbered Earth's combined forces by a wide margin, even with the nightfall. Thus advanced weapons and the element of surprise now partially spent, the coming battle near Earth would be the largest and most dangerous fight in human history, and there was no guarantee, no matter how carefully Chen's team had planned, that it would end the way everyone back on Earth so desperately needed it to end. She called Okoro and her senior officers together in the ship's briefing room, the same quiet, focused meeting that had preceded every major decision throughout the ship's long construction and training period. The probe is over, she told them. They know what we are, even if they do not fully understand what we can do. From this point forward, every move we make has to account for a fleet that is now actively afraid of us, which makes them less predictable, not more. We need to close the distance carefully, match their acceleration, and be in position to strike the moment the home fleet engages them near Earth. And if they turn to face us before we are in position, asked one of her tactical officers. Then we adapt, Vasquez said simply. Everything we built this ship for comes down to one basic idea. We do not need to win every possible version of this fight. We only need to win the one that actually happens. Rel is a capable commander. He has already shown that by pulling his fleet together and pushing hard for Earth instead of panicking, we should expect him to keep making smart decisions, and we should be ready for all of them. The day, nightfall, began its own pursuit shortly after, engines burning at a careful, measured pace, calculated to keep the massive ship close enough to strike when the moment came, without closing the distance so quickly that it risked exposing itself to a coordinated counterattack from the Dominion fleet's rear guard. Behind the ship, the crew settled back into the tense, focused rhythm of battle stations, watching their screens, checking their systems, waiting for the next phase of a war that had, until only days earlier, existed for most of them only as a distant, theoretical threat discussed in classified briefings. Ahead of both fleets, Earth continued its slow orbit around its star, still calm on the surface, still hiding the true scale of the defense that 18 months of open, if quietly conducted, military buildup had assembled in high orbit and across the surrounding cislunar space. Somewhere in that gathered force, ships and crews who had trained for years without ever expecting to fight a real battle, waited for the moment when the Dominion Armada would finally arrive close enough to see exactly what humanity had built to greet them, and the true scale of the trap that had been closing around the Dominion fleet since the very first day of its approach was still only half revealed. The Dominion Armada crossed the orbit of Mars 2 days after the skirmish with the nightfall. And for the first time since the campaign began, Fleet Marshal Rel allowed himself to see what waited ahead of him with complete clarity. Earth's defense fleet had gathered in high orbit around the planet, spread across a wide, layered formation that made no attempt to hide itself. Hundreds of warships arranged in a pattern that Rel's tactical officers struggled to classify, using any doctrine in the Dominion's extensive combat records. Marshal, I count approximately 400 vessels of varying classes, reported his chief intelligence officer, studying the long-range scans with growing unease. Formation depth suggests a defense in layers, outer picket screen, midfield strike groups, and a heavily reinforced core close to the planet itself. This is not the formation of a species that expected an easy defeat. Rel studied the display in silence, comparing it against everything he had learned about this world since the campaign began. The scans from years earlier had shown a species with barely a handful of orbital defense platforms. What he saw now was an organized, disciplined battle fleet that looked, in its structure if not its exact technology, disturbingly similar to something the Dominion itself might have built. He thought again of Vess's warning from the beginning of this approach, and he found himself wishing, for the first time in his career, that his own instincts had been wrong, rather than hers being right. Behind his formation, the Nightfall continued its slow, deliberate pursuit, close enough now that its presence had become a constant pressure on every tactical decision Rel made. He had considered, more than once over the past 2 days, turning a significant portion of his fleet to deal with it directly, but every calculation his officers ran confirmed the same grim conclusion. A direct engagement against a vessel with that level of armor and firepower would cost him ships he could not afford to lose before the larger battle near Earth even began. "Marshal," Vess said, standing beside him as the final approach toward Earth's orbital defense line began. "We are caught between two prepared forces now, exactly as I feared from the beginning. Whatever choice we make, we will be fighting this battle without the advantage of surprise, and without the advantage of choosing our own ground. Then we fight with the advantages we still have," Rel said. "Numbers, experience. 4 previous campaigns of combat data that this fleet does not have to draw on. We are still the larger, more practiced force, Commander. Whatever else has changed." He gave the order to advance, and the Dominion Armada surged forward in a coordinated wave, 300 warships converging on Earth's defense line, with the discipline of a fleet that had fought and won this exact kind of battle many times before, even if never quite under these circumstances. The opening exchange began at extreme range, both fleets unleashing long-distance weapon fire that lit up the space around Earth's orbit with flashes of energy, bright enough to be visible from the planet's surface far below. Aboard the human flagship, Ares Ascendant. Positioned at the heart of Earth's defense formation, Admiral Sarah Whitfield watched the opening barrage with the calm, focused attention of a commander who had spent 18 months preparing her fleet for exactly this moment. She had come up through the ranks of Earth's original national navies before the formation of the United Earth Defense Fleet, and she carried with her a hard-won understanding that no battle plan, however carefully built, survived first contact without needing adjustment. "Report," she said, watching the tactical display as the first wave of Dominion fire struck her outer picket screen, testing the strength of Earth's defenses. "Outer screen holding, Admiral," came the reply from her tactical officer. "Shield technology performing within expected parameters. We are taking damage, but nothing critical yet. Dominion formation continues to advance in a standard wedge pattern, consistent with the doctrine documented in Dr. Chen's analysis." "Good," Whitfield said. "Then let us give them exactly what that doctrine expects, right up until the moment we do not." The battle unfolded across the following hours, in a way that neither side had fully anticipated. Rel's forces pressed hard against Earth's outer defense line, using coordinated strikes and overwhelming numbers to punch through weaker points in the human formation, exactly as they had done against dozens of other species before. But Earth's defenses, built from years of study of exactly this kind of attack, bent without breaking, falling back in controlled, deliberate stages that cost the Dominion far more than any previous campaign had ever required. "They are not panicking," Vess observed, watching the human fleet's disciplined withdrawal from her station aboard the Devourer of Light. "Look at their formation, Marshal. They are giving ground exactly the way our own doctrine teaches, trading space for time, and drawing us deeper into a prepared kill zone." Rel had already noticed the same pattern, and it troubled him more with every passing minute. He ordered his forces to slow their advance, wary now of pressing too aggressively into a trap that felt increasingly deliberate rather than accidental. But slowing his advance meant giving Earth's defenders more time to reposition, and more time meant more opportunity for whatever the Nightfall, still shadowing his rear formation, intended to do next. That opportunity came almost exactly when Vasquez had planned it would, as the main battle near Earth reached its most intense phase, with both fleets locked in a grinding exchange of fire across the layered defense zones surrounding the planet. The Nightfall finally broke from its shadowing position and surged forward at full speed, closing the distance to the Dominion fleet's rear formation faster than any of Rel's rear guard ships could react. "Marshal, the human vessel is closing rapidly on our rear flank," came the urgent report from Rel's sensor officers, panic creeping into a voice that had remained steady throughout the earlier hours of battle. It is moving faster than our earlier readings suggested possible for a vessel of that size. Rel felt the situation shift beneath him in a way that no amount of preparation could fully soften. His fleet, already committed to a grinding battle against Earth's main defense line, now faced a second attack from a massive, heavily armed vessel closing on its exposed rear, exactly the pincer maneuver he had feared from the very first moment he detected the nightfall. Some's presence days earlier. "Rearguard squadrons, break off and intercept," he ordered, watching as a cluster of his heavier cruisers turned to face the incoming threat. "All remaining forces, maintain pressure on the human home fleet. We cannot afford to lose momentum on either front." The rearguard squadrons, nearly 40 ships strong, turned to meet the nightfall. With the desperate courage of crews who understood exactly how much depended on stopping this single vessel before it could tear through their formation from behind, Vasquez watched them approach on her tactical display, with the same calm focus she had maintained throughout every simulation of this exact scenario over the past 6 years. 40 ships, Captain, Okoro reported, running the final targeting calculations. "They intend to overwhelm us through sheer numbers before we can do significant damage to their main formation." "They can try," Vasquez said. "Bring all weapon systems to full power. Target their lead squadron first, and do not let them establish a coordinated firing pattern against us. We move, we strike, and we keep moving. This ship was built to survive exactly this kind of engagement." The nightfall tore into the Dominion rearguard with a ferocity that stunned even the crew members who had trained for years to expect it. Its plasma cannons fired in rapid, precise sequences, each shot finding its mark against ships that had never faced weapons technology this advanced, while its heavy armor absorbed return fire that would have crippled any 3 Dominion warships combined. Ship after ship in the rearguard squadron broke apart under the nightfall. This assault, their crews fighting desperately against a threat that outmatched them in every measurable way. Within 20 minutes, the 40-ship rearguard had been reduced to fewer than 15 functioning vessels, and the survivors began falling back in disorganized retreat, their formation broken, their coordinated defense shattered by a single ship that moved through their ranks like a predator among prey that had never before faced a true hunter. Rel watched the reports flow in, with a growing, cold understanding that this battle was slipping away from him faster than any campaign he had ever commanded. "Marshal, the rear guard is broken," Vess reported, her voice tight with barely controlled tension. "The human vessel is continuing its advance toward our main formation. If it reaches our core ships while we remain engaged with their home fleet, we will be caught in a 2-front battle we cannot sustain." Rel made his decision in the space of a few seconds, drawing on instincts sharpened across 4 previous campaigns, and the desperate need to salvage something from a battle that had begun to feel, for the first time in his career, genuinely unwinnable. "Order the fleet to consolidate. Pull our forces back from the outer engagement zone and form a defensive sphere around the flagship. If we cannot win this battle through advance, we will win it through survival, and we will find a way to break out once we understand the full shape of what we are facing." The order came almost too late, as Dominion ships began the difficult, dangerous maneuver of consolidating under fire. Admiral Whitfield's forces pressed their advantage, recognizing the shift in Dominion formation as exactly the kind of opportunity her own defensive doctrine had been built to exploit. "They are falling back to consolidate," she reported to her command staff, watching the tactical display shift in real time. "This is the moment. Full fleet advance. Close the range, and do not let them establish a stable defensive position." Earth's home fleet surged forward across the entire length of the battle line, closing the distance against a Dominion formation that was simultaneously trying to defend itself from the front and reposition against a devastating threat closing in from behind. The coordinated pressure from both directions created exactly the chaos that Chen's original battle plan, developed years earlier in a quiet briefing room deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, had always been designed to produce. Rel's flagship, the Devourer of Light, found itself increasingly isolated as the battle around it fractured into dozens of smaller, desperate engagements. Ships from both fleets, locked in close-range combat across a widening debris field that had once been open, empty orbital space. Vess remained at his side throughout, relaying updates and coordinating what remained of a command structure that was rapidly losing the ability to control the battle as a single coherent whole. Marshal, the Nightfall has broken through our consolidated defense at 3 points, she reported, her voice now carrying the flat, exhausted tone of an officer watching a battle slip permanently beyond recovery. Fleet Captain Kesh's squadron has been destroyed. We have lost contact with over half our original formation. Rel stared at the tactical display, at the wreckage of what had once been the largest, most confident armada he had ever commanded, now scattered and broken across the space, surrounding a world that had spent 6 quiet years preparing for exactly this day. He thought of every previous campaign, every world that had surrendered in the face of overwhelming Dominion force, and he understood, with the clarity that only came in the final moments of a lost battle, that this world had never intended to be one of them. "Signal the fleet," he said finally, his voice heavy with the weight of a decision he had never expected to make. "All ships still capable of independent movement are to attempt breakout and retreat toward the outer system. We cannot win this battle. We will not throw away more lives trying." But even as the order went out, the Nightfall was already closing on the Devourer of Light itself, Vasquez having tracked the Dominion flagship's position throughout the entire engagement, waiting for exactly this moment to bring the battle to its final, decisive conclusion. "Captain, the Dominion flagship is attempting to break away toward the outer system," Okoro reported, watching the day. Devourer of Light. Zenjin's signature flare as Rel's crew pushed the great ship to its maximum speed. If it escapes, it will carry warning of everything we have shown here today, back to Dominion space. Every advantage of surprise we have spent 6 years building will be gone. Vasquez considered this for only a moment. The original battle plan had never called for the total destruction of the Dominion fleet. Chen's projections, built from years of studying the Empire's own records, had always assumed that total annihilation was neither possible nor necessary, that the goal was to break this armada so thoroughly that it could never threaten Earth again, while leaving enough survivors to carry an unmistakable message back to whatever authority commanded the Dominion's wider empire. But the flagship itself was different. The flagship carried command codes, campaign records, and years of accumulated Dominion battle data that Chen's analysts would give almost anything to study firsthand. "Do not let it escape," Vasquez said. "Full pursuit. I want that ship disabled, not destroyed if we can manage it. Target their engines and weapon systems only." The Nightfall surged after the fleeing Dominion flagship, its superior speed closing the gap despite the Devourer of Light zone considerable engine output. Aboard the Dominion ship, Rel watched the pursuit unfold on his tactical display, with a grim, exhausted clarity, understanding that his ship, for all its power and its long history of successful campaigns, simply could not outrun a vessel that had been specifically built to counter exactly this kind of desperate retreat. "Marshal, they are gaining," Vess reported. "At current closing speed, they will be within effective weapons range in approximately 6 minutes." Rel weighed his remaining options with the same cold calculation that had guided every decision of this campaign. He could continue the retreat and hope his engines held out long enough to reach a safe jump point, or he could turn and fight, using the Devourer of Light, the zone considerable weapons to at least damage the pursuing vessel before the inevitable end. Neither option offered much hope, but he found, in that final calculation, that he was not yet ready to simply run. "Bring the ship about," he said. "Full weapons power to forward batteries. If this is where the Devourer of Light meets its end, it will not end with our backs turned." The flagship turned to face its pursuer, and for several minutes, the 2 largest warships involved in the entire battle exchanged fire directly. The Devourer of Light used considerable weapons batteries testing the Nightfall, its heavy armor in a duel that dwarfed almost every other engagement happening across the surrounding debris field. Vasquez watched her own ship's damage reports scroll past with careful attention, noting with quiet satisfaction that even the concentrated fire of a Dominion flagship struggled to penetrate the armor her engineers had spent 6 years perfecting. "Hull integrity holding at 92%, Captain," Okoro reported. "Their weapons are powerful, but our armor is simply built for a different scale of engagement than anything they have encountered before. Return fire. Engines and primary weapon systems only, Vasquez ordered. I still want that ship recoverable if at all possible. The nightfall. His next volley struck the devourer of light. With surgical precision, plasma fire tearing through the Dominion flagship's engine housing and crippling 3 of its 4 primary weapon batteries in a single coordinated strike. The great ship shuddered under the impact, alarms blaring across every deck as damage control teams scrambled to contain fires and hull breaches that spread faster than they could be sealed. Rel felt the ship lurch beneath him as power flickered across the bridge, and he understood, in that moment, that the battle was truly over. "Marshal, we have lost primary engine power," came the report from his chief engineer. Strain evident even through the ship's damaged comm system. "Weapons systems at 20% capacity. We cannot continue this fight." Rel stood at the center of his crippled bridge, surrounded by the flashing warning lights and the controlled panic of a crew fighting to keep their ship alive. And he made the hardest decision of his long career. He had led 4 successful campaigns, had never once surrendered a ship under his command, and had built a reputation across the Dominion Navy as a commander who found a way to win, even against difficult odds. None of that experience had prepared him for a moment like this one, facing an enemy who had outthought and outfought him at every stage of a campaign he had entered with total confidence. "Signal the human vessel," he said quietly. "Open a channel. Tell them the devourer of light stands down." The transmission reached the nightfall. Moments later, translated through systems that Chen's linguistic team had spent years preparing, based on the communication protocols recovered from the original crashed scout ship. Vasquez read the surrender message on her display, a formal, careful statement acknowledging defeat and requesting terms, and she felt the enormous weight of 6 years of preparation finally beginning to lift from her shoulders. "Hold fire," she told her crew. "Signal Earth Command. Tell them the Dominion flagship has surrendered, and tell them the battle for Earth is over." Across the wider debris field surrounding the planet, the remaining fragments of the Dominion Armada began receiving the same message relayed from their crippled flagship, and one by one, the surviving ships that had entered this system with such total confidence, only days earlier, began powering down their weapons, accepting a defeat that none of their species' long history of conquest had ever prepared them to imagine. Admiral Whitfield watched the last pockets of resistance fade from her tactical display and allowed herself, for the first time in 18 months, a long, slow breath of something that felt almost like relief. "Casualties?" she asked quietly. "Significant, Admiral, but far lower than our worst projections," came the reply. "Preliminary reports suggest we have lost approximately 60 ships across the entire defense fleet. The Dominion Armada has lost over 240. Whitfield nodded slowly, thinking of the years of quiet preparation that had led to this moment, of every officer and engineer and analyst who had given up ordinary lives to build a defense that most of humanity still did not know existed. The battle for Earth had ended, against every historical precedent in the Dominion's long, unbroken record of conquest, in a victory for the small, quiet world that had refused to be caught unprepared. 3 days after the battle ended, Fleet Marshal Acasis Rel stood in a small, quiet room aboard a human medical station in high orbit, his wrists bound loosely with restraints that felt more symbolic than functional, watching through a viewport as recovery crews worked among the drifting wreckage of his once mighty armada. He had commanded 300 ships when this campaign began. Fewer than 50 remained under any kind of coordinated control, scattered and damaged, their crews now prisoners of a species the Dominion had believed, right up until the final hours, to be nothing more than an easy conquest. Dr. Amara Chen entered the room quietly, accompanied by a translator device that rendered her words into the sharp, clipped tones of the Dominion's own language. She had waited 6 years for the chance to speak directly with someone from the Empire whose records had shaped nearly every decision of her professional life, and now that the moment had finally arrived, she found herself surprisingly calm, more curious than triumphant. "Fleet Marshal Rel," she said. "My name is Dr. Amara Chen. I have spent the last 6 years studying your Empire's history of conquest, using data recovered from a scout ship that crashed in our system before your Armada ever arrived. I wanted to meet the commander who led this campaign, and I wanted to ask you something, if you are willing to answer." Rel studied her for a long moment, this small, unremarkable-looking creature who had, apparently, spent years preparing a defeat that had cost him his entire fleet and very nearly his life. "Ask your question, Doctor. I have little else to occupy my time at present. Did you ever consider, at any point before this campaign began, that we might already know you were coming?" Rel was quiet for a while before answering, thinking back over the years of scouting reports, the confident briefings, the assumptions built into every level of Dominion military doctrine about species that grew technologically faster than expected, but never fast enough to truly threaten a well-prepared invasion. "No," he admitted finally. "We believed your rapid technological growth made you dangerous in the long term, perhaps, but never that you could have anticipated our exact approach with enough precision to prepare a defense this complete. That confidence, I now understand, was our greatest mistake." "It was the same mistake your empire made against every species you recorded conquering," Chen said, not unkindly. "You scouted them, studied them, and then attacked with overwhelming force, confident that surprise alone would carry the day. It worked for a very long time, against species who never had the chance to learn your patterns. We had that chance, because one of your own scout ships gave it to us." Rel absorbed this in silence, understanding, for the first time, the full shape of what had happened to him. His empire's own carefully kept records, meant to guide future conquests with efficient precision, had instead become the tool of humanity's defense. There was a bitter kind of irony in it that he found himself unable to fully resent, even as a defeated commander sitting in restraints aboard an enemy medical station. "What happens now, Doctor?" he asked. "To myself, to my surviving crews, to whatever remains of this campaign?" "That is being decided at levels above my authority," Chen said. "But I can tell you what I know. Earth does not intend to destroy your surviving ships or crews. We are not interested in becoming the kind of empire your own records describe. What we do intend is to send you home, eventually, with a very clear message for whoever commands the dominion above you. Earth is not an easy conquest. Earth was never going to be an easy conquest, not since the day we found your crashed scout ship and began preparing for exactly this day. Back on Earth's surface, the true scale of what had happened above the planet was only beginning to become public knowledge. General Reyes stood before a hastily assembled gathering of world leaders in a secure conference chamber, presenting 6 years of secret history to men and women who were hearing, for the first time, that their world had faced an alien invasion and had already won before most of them even knew the threat existed. The reactions in that room ranged from disbelief to anger to a kind of stunned, grateful relief, and Reyes answered every question as honestly as he could, explaining the impossible choice he and a small circle of officials had made 6 years earlier, the choice to prepare in secret rather than risk the chaos and division that public knowledge of an approaching invasion might have caused. Not everyone in that room agreed the choice had been the right one, and Reyes did not expect them to. He had made peace long ago with the idea that history would judge the Long Watch program in ways he could not fully predict, and he was simply grateful, more than anything else, that there would be a history left to write it into. Captain Vasquez returned to Earth briefly in the weeks following the battle, though the Nightfall remained on station in high orbit, its crew continuing the long, careful work of processing prisoners, recovering wreckage, and beginning preliminary study of captured Dominion technology that would occupy human engineers for years to come. She stood before her own gathering of officials, far smaller and far more private than the one Reyes had faced, and found herself, for the first time in 6 years, without a clear mission ahead of her. What happens to the Nightfall? "Now, Captain?" one of the officials asked. "The immediate threat has passed. Do we simply retire the ship, given how much its existence has cost?" Vasquez considered the question carefully before answering. "The Dominion Empire is vast, sir. What we defeated here was a single armada, a single campaign commander who underestimated us. Somewhere above him, an empire that has conquered 50 other worlds will eventually learn what happened at Earth, and I do not believe for a moment that this will be the end of their interest in us. If anything, I believe it may draw more attention, not less. The Nightfall does not retire. It becomes the foundation for whatever comes next." Dr. Chen, invited to the same meeting, nodded in agreement. Fleet Marshal Rel's surviving crews have already told us a great deal, some of it willingly. Once they understood we intended to treat them fairly, rather than as simple trophies of war. The Dominion Empire spans dozens of systems, held together by a command structure that values strength and results above almost anything else. A defeated campaign commander does not simply return home and disappear quietly. His failure will be studied, debated, and eventually, someone above him will decide how to respond to it. "Do you believe they will attack again?" asked another official, her voice tight, with the kind of fear that had been building steadily since the battle's true scale became public knowledge. "I believe," Chen said carefully, "that they will be far more cautious next time, and far better prepared. Which means we cannot afford to become complacent simply because we won the first battle. The Long Watch program does not end with this victory. If anything, it needs to grow, because the next challenge we face may not be a single overconfident armada that underestimated us. It may be an empire that has learned exactly how dangerous we can be, and has decided to respond accordingly." The following months brought enormous change to Earth, changes that reshaped nearly every aspect of how humanity organized itself and understood its place among the stars. The existence of the Dominion Empire, and the 6 years of secret preparation that had allowed Earth to survive its first contact with it, became public knowledge across the entire planet, sparking debates and disagreements that would continue for years, even as the practical work of expanding Earth's defenses and studying captured Dominion technology moved forward with new urgency and, for the first time, full public support. Fleet Marshal Rel remained in human custody for nearly a year, treated, as Chen had promised, with a fairness that surprised him more than almost anything else about his defeat. He spent much of that year in long conversations with Chen and her research team, sharing details of Dominion history, culture, and military doctrine in exchange for a growing, grudging respect for the species that had defeated him so thoroughly. He did not fully understand, even after months of study, how a world with such a short history of real technological development had managed to prepare so completely for a threat it had barely known existed, but he came to accept that underestimating this species had been the single greatest mistake of his long career. When the time finally came to release him and the surviving members of his crew, sending them home aboard a stripped-down transport vessel equipped only with basic navigation systems, Rel stood one final time in front of Dr. Chen and Captain Vasquez, both of whom had come to see the departure personally. "I do not know what will happen when I return," he told them through the translator. "My empire does not forgive failure easily, and this failure was larger than any in recent memory. But whatever judgment awaits me, I intend to tell them the truth about what we found here. Not a weak, unprepared world ripe for easy conquest, but a species that watched us coming for years and built exactly what it needed to survive us. That is all we ask, Marshal," Vasquez said. "Tell your empire the truth. Tell them that Earth is not looking for a war with the Dominion, but that Earth will not be an easy target for one either. And tell them that whatever they decide to send next, we will be ready for that too." The transport carrying Rel and his surviving crew departed Earth's system 3 days later, watched by long-range sensors as it accelerated toward the outer edge of the system, and vanished into the deep dark beyond, carrying with it the first true account of humanity's strength that the wider Dominion Empire would ever receive. Behind it, Earth continued its steady work, rebuilding its defense fleet, expanding the Long Watch program into something larger and more permanent than Chen or Reyes had ever originally imagined, and preparing, with the same careful, patient discipline that had won them this first great battle, for whatever challenge the vast and unknown galaxy might send their way next. Captain Vasquez remained in command of the Nightfall. As it took up a new position, no longer hidden in the shadows of a distant asteroid belt, but stationed openly in high orbit above the world it had helped to save, a visible symbol now rather than a secret weapon, a reminder to every person on Earth that the quiet years of preparation had been worth every sacrifice they demanded. She often stood at the ship's main viewport during the long, quiet hours of her watch, looking down at the blue and green world turning slowly below her, and she thought, each time, of the 6 years that had led to this moment, and of the many more years of careful, patient work that still lay ahead before humanity could truly call itself safe among the stars. The story of the battle spread slowly across the wider galaxy in the months and years that followed, carried by trade routes and diplomatic channels that Earth had only just begun to establish with other species, who had, for their own reasons, learned to fear and resent the Dominion Empire's long history of conquest. Among those species, a new phrase began to circulate, spoken with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope, describing a small, young world that had done what no other conquered target ever managed. It had seen the Armada coming, and it had already placed a warship behind it, waiting patiently in the dark, long before the invaders ever arrived. Admiral Whitfield oversaw the reconstruction of Earth's defense fleet in the years that followed the battle, working closely with Chen's expanding research division to incorporate lessons learned from captured Dominion technology into a new generation of human warships. The work was slow and often difficult, complicated by the same political disagreements that had always shadowed the Long Watch program, but it moved forward steadily, driven by a public that now understood, in a way it never had before, exactly how close humanity had come to becoming another entry in the Dominion's long record of easy conquests. General Reyes retired from active command 2 years after the battle, exhausted by the weight of 6 years of secrecy, followed by 2 more of intense, very public rebuilding. He spent his final years advising the newly formed Earth Defense Council, a body created specifically to oversee humanity's growing relationship with the wider galaxy, and he often told younger officers, in the quiet, careful way of a man who had carried an enormous secret for far too long, that the hardest part of any war was never the fighting itself. The hardest part was making the decision, years before anyone else understood the danger, to prepare for a fight that most people did not yet believe was coming. Dr. Chen's research division grew into one of the largest scientific institutions on the planet, its work no longer hidden behind layers of classified cover programs but conducted openly, with international cooperation that would have seemed impossible only a few years earlier. She continued studying the data recovered from Rel's captured flagship for the rest of her career, uncovering deeper details about the Dominion Empire's structure and history that helped shape Earth's growing diplomatic and military strategy for dealing with a galaxy that had suddenly become far larger and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined only a decade before. Word of Rel's defeat did eventually reach the higher levels of Dominion command, carried across the vast distances between stars by the very transport ship that Earth had allowed him to take home. The report caused exactly the kind of stir that Chen had predicted, sparking fierce debate among Dominion military leadership about whether Earth represented a threat worth a full, dedicated campaign, or an anomaly best avoided until better prepared forces could be assembled. No immediate second invasion followed, not in the years immediately after the battle, and Earth's growing intelligence network, built from lessons learned during the Long Watch program, worked hard to make sure humanity would have as much warning of any future threat as it had of the first one. Captain Vasquez eventually stepped back from direct command of the Nightfall, moving into a broader role helping train the growing generation of officers who would crew Earth's expanding fleet of advanced warships, built using lessons drawn from her own ship's design. She never fully left the Nightfall behind, returning often to walk its corridors and speak with its crew, and she made a point, every year on the anniversary of the battle, of standing once more at the ship's main viewport, looking down at the blue and green world it had helped defend, remembering the 6 long years of quiet, unglamorous work that had made the entire victory possible. Historians who studied the battle in the decades that followed often focused on the drama of the final engagement, the destruction of Rel's rear guard, the crippling of his flagship, the desperate final hours as the Dominion Armada broke apart above Earth's orbit. But those who understood the full story, the researchers and officers who had lived through the Long Watch program from its earliest, most uncertain days, always pointed to a quieter truth at the heart of everything that happened. The battle had not truly been won in the skies above Earth. It had been won years earlier, in a small briefing room deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, when a tired scientist and a cautious general chose to believe an impossible warning and spend 6 years preparing for a war that most of the world did not yet know was coming. That choice, more than any single weapon or any single battle, became the foundation of everything Earth built in the years that followed, a reminder carried forward into every new ship, every new defense system, and every new generation of officers who trained under the shadow of the Nightfall. Its dark, silent hull, humanity had learned, in the hardest possible way, that survival in a galaxy filled with older, stronger, more experienced powers depended not on matching their strength directly, but on outthinking them, on seeing further ahead than they expected any young species to see, and on being willing to do the long, patient, often thankless work of preparing for a danger that had not yet arrived. The Armada that had once crossed 60 light-years with total confidence, certain that Earth would fall as easily as 50 worlds before it, became instead the first clear lesson in a galaxy that would slowly, over the years that followed, come to understand a simple and unsettling truth about the small blue world at the edge of Dominion space. Earth did not wait to be found. Earth watched and prepared, and when the Armada finally arrived, Earth had already placed a warship behind them, waiting patiently in the dark, long before a single enemy ship ever crossed into the system they had come so confidently to conquer.